practice, you know. I kind of understand why they made it like they did now.
I don't know, I'm kind of afraid of height. It's fun to be back in the place I left. I spent many months in Florida when I think about it. I always left in a hurry. It's fun for me. We have a big reunion, of course, of I think there are almost 30 astronauts down here now. We're inducting 4 of our first shuttle astronauts into our Hall of Fame. And what's fun is we're merging ultimately our Hall of Fame and our Space Camp part of Hall of Fame into the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Center. So we'll be part of your visiting route, which will be kind of fun for all of us. For me, it's fun to come back and look at that Apollo Saturn building. I'm still in awe about that. The magnitude of what's there and how people can get to know what we did in those early days. Those little toys you see out in the backyard here, I can't believe I sat on one of those, let alone 3 of them. But the fun of it is that we had a country that was committed to going into space, to going to the moon and back. I always say moon and back, by the way. We always confirmed the round-trip ticket. We made that commitment to do that before 1970, and we did it. We won a war, the Cold War. Now we have another one. We have to make another commitment to win this next one. That's part of why we're having a little excess security. I got in trouble with a little tiny Swiss Army knife tonight, and I rescued it. I think the things I left here with, those big toys that were 7.5 million pounds of thrust, and they're worried about a little teeny Swiss Army knife. Unreal. But that's how we are. We're overreacting, but at least we're reacting in the right direction. We're going to try to keep this country alive, keep the freedom we live with, the way we were brought up, and make it a whole country again. And I think that's probably part of why we who flew those early space missions have that same kind of warmth about the lovely country we're a part of. And I hope you all have the same love of country that we do. I'm known as a smart astronaut. Dubbed that many years ago by Bob Hope. I stole one of his punchlines off a cue card. And in real time he said, "Gerard, you're a smart astronaut." But it's kind of fun to share some ideas with you. I don't want to sit up here and talk like mad, but it is kind of fun to answer some questions you may have. And if we have trouble getting a response, we have a moving mic.
That's right. Here we go.
Mikey likes it.
There we go. Well, we'll take this gentleman right here. What's your name and your question, sir?
George. My question is, given an opportunity like John Glenn had in '98, would you participate in a shuttle mission, and would your destination be station, Hubble, or something beyond that?
Well, actually, I'm not that old. But I, too, would do anything to get to the U.S. Senate. But if I did command the shuttle mission, I would like very much to go to the International Space Station and take a look at that. But the real key, though, my way of flying space was to command my vehicle. And to command a shuttle would take me about 3 years to get proficient enough to command a shuttle mission. To go along as a passenger the way John did, because we tease each other, we're very close. The 7 of us are all brothers with lots of sibling rivalry, so we play games like this. But I would want to command a shuttle mission, and I don't deserve that at this point. I'm not proficient enough. Long answer, but I like the question.
Our next question.
Are you a turtle?
You bet your super sweet ass I am. There is a bar outside, but I'm not going to buy for any turtles in there. I hope you all know that turtles are clean-minded people, and we're referring, when we answer properly, to a donkey or a burro. We have passed the test of having clean-minded answers to some rather double entendre questions.
Hi, I'm Erin. My question is, what did it feel like to fly the next consecutive mission after the Apollo 1 tragedy?
That was a little too fast for me.
What did it feel like to fly the next consecutive mission after the Apollo 1 tragedy?
I'll repeat the question a little bit, but to take that mission after losing the 3 men on the launch pad is a tough one. Gus Grissom was my next door neighbor, of course one of the original 7. We were all very close, but to lose a flight like that was a tough one for us. And I was backup for that mission. British spacecraft the day before and said there were some glitches, some problems. Anomalies is another word. And if it doesn't ring right, like a bell, if it doesn't ring, and Gus knew that because he named his spacecraft Liberty Bell, if you remember. The result of it was that they went ahead and ran that test. They had almost the same thing that caused the Challenger accident, go fever. And the crew felt they were committed to continuing that test, which was not a launch test, it was a pre-launch test, and they suffered for it. So as a result, I did not suffer from go fever. Although Mark Harmon in that movie From Earth to the Moon inferred I did not. I really didn't feel that ready to go into space unless everything was just right. We made the mission just right, and from then on everything worked beautifully.
Our next question is from Austin.
How many sunrises do you see in one day?
How many sunrises?
How many times are we in space?
How many sunrises do you see in one day?
Oh, well, that's a good question, because you go around the world, we go around the world once every 90 minutes. We call that an Earth turn. So we see an Earth rise and an Earth set. You people down here call them sunrises and sunsets. You Earthlings. Well, we refer to those sunsets or sunrises. We have one every 45 minutes. And in one day you have 16. In 10 days you have 160. It took me a long time to get excited about a sunset or a sunrise again. I still do love them.
Our next question.
Hi, I'm over here.
Hi.
Of your 3 flights that you had, Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo, was there any particular thing that happened during those 3 flights was your most favorite thing during the space?
I think doing that Gemini mission where we rendezvoused with another vehicle, with 2 men in it, of course, which is even more unique in that sense. No one had ever done that before. You might recall, in my vehicle I had Tom Stafford, who was a Naval Academy graduate, although he made the mistake of going in the Air Force. I'm a Naval Academy graduate. And in the other vehicle, Gemini 7, which was our target vehicle, were Jim Lovell, a Naval Academy graduate, and Frank Borman, a West Point graduate. So I filled my window with the sign when I got about as close as I am to this podium, "Beat Army." That was the fun of it.
Next.
On Apollo 7, who was the one that thought up the idea for those cue cards? The one that you had, keep those cards and letters coming in, folks, from the lovely Apollo room high atop everything.
Very good, you know about those. The combination of Bill Dana, who used to be Jose Jimenez, I've been called Hose B, but he and Big Top Everything. There was another one, keep those cards and letters coming. My secretary never did forgive me for that.
Unfortunately, we only have time for one last question, and that's you, sir.
Yeah, Wally, did the Apollo astronauts expect to go on to Mars when they were doing their flights? Did they think eventually they'd be able to go on?
I think we were very excited and committed to going to the moon and back, and Mars was kind of a way out thing. And I think it still is a way out thing. We need to get very much excited about a new propulsion system, much more exotic than what we have now. A lunar mission is roughly 10 or 11 days round trip. A Mars mission could be 2 or 3 years. And we just can't have humans do that task at this point in time. I typically say we needed 6 pounds of water a day just to drink water for the body, not for showers and that kind of thing. That's a ton of water per year per person. That's a lot of water to send to Mars. And you can't wait to get it until you get there. So it's a complicated mission. Plus, we don't have a commitment, that word I use again, a world in crisis, which is what we had during Apollo. I look back as Apollo as a way of winning a Cold War. We convinced the Soviets that we could do something they couldn't do. And that, in turn, shook them up enough to where I think the Cold War was over and they fell apart. And yet now, I might add, those Soviets are good friends, the Russians. One little closing remark. I just recently retired from our San Diego Air and Space Museum. But just this last February, we inducted the Apollo Soyuz crew into our Hall of Fame. And we brought the 2 Russian cosmonauts back, and Yuri Gagarin, not Yuri Gagarin, Alexei Leonov and Valery Kubashov were there, and they're old buddies now. It's kind of funny to see how that all came about. So we're now friends, of course, and we have our space station up here now with Culberson watching two Soviets who are now Russian. So it's kind of a fun thing to see it changing. Thank you all for coming tonight. It's a pleasure being with you. There'll be some other small astronauts.
So I was a voting member of, we call it voting, King Tours don't work quite that way, but nevertheless, sat at the table and could voice my say for every change, if you will, and I had led a team at every design review, the ops team, through that design evolution of Space Shuttle. And then had the real opportunity to go back to the astronaut office and be a part of the first. And it wasn't just flying the first flight. We were part of evolving the training program. Because, you know, when you got a new vehicle that hadn't been used before, there is nothing you can go grab off the shelf. No books, no nothing. So you end up in the process with people inventing all of that, including the procedures, flight techniques. We actually had to, we're part of testing and getting our early simulators working right. Both the mission type simulators. It's very, very long-term reason you got a space program is to preserve the human race. I looked at, we live on a single spaceship called Earth, and it ain't gonna be around here forever. So I look at, it's kind of like providence, or divine providence, that we uniquely, we humans, and it's the only critters I know that could do it, uniquely have been given the capability, we could go outward and plant the race elsewhere, on other planets, or even further, eventually. And it looks like a good way to use some of our resources. We spend an awful lot of our resources in other directions because we humans, and I'm talking about all Earth, don't get along too well, as you know, for various reasons. And we're really all stuck here together, whether we like it or not. So I'd hope we put a little bit, probably in 1988, I think it was, a RAND report said, we the Earth, counting all countries, all funds we put into weaponry, armies, etc., including third world countries, we spent $1 trillion in 1988 in that cause of protecting ourselves, unfortunately, because it's essential to do, because we can't get along. But that's $1 trillion I think we can take a little parcel of, maybe 3%, 4%, and have a very robust space program that will continue to work for that future. That someday we will evolve with technology to invent warp drives or something equivalent that we can get further out. And like I say, put the race out there to preserve it. Now I look at that, why else would God have given us this?
I can't believe they got all these guys to come here. It's pretty cool. I'm freezing my ears off.
Really?
The man that you have come to see is with us, and let me just give you a short introduction. This man is one of the original 7. He had the second manned space flight from the Mercury days. Please, put your hands together for our distinguished and honored guest.
Well, good morning. First to the children, I speak to your parents only because they're required to bring you here. You're the important folks, you youngsters. And I see one young man here, and some more over there. I want to tell you something that you might not have thought of yet. You kids who are around 10 years old, 5 years old, are in a wonderful place. Because if you stay in school, and if you work hard, and if you decide this is what you want to do, you are just the right age to fly to Mars. Because when you're 30, that's what we're all going to be doing in this country, around the world. We're going to be flying to Mars. And stay in school and study hard, and you can go to Mars. And when you get there, I would ask you to write me a letter and tell me what it looks like. Yeah, it's a wonderful time to be 10. One other thing I'd like to tell you, you weren't around when we were in a terrible Cold War situation with the Soviet Union. We had a driving competition between the Soviet Union and the United States to be the first to the moon. And that was partly because the Soviets and the Americans believed that preeminence, that means excellence in spaceflight, was a condition of our survival. We thought that if the Russians got to the moon before we did, we had lost all our security. In any event, in those early days, we were fighting a peaceful, but it was a heated competition in space. And we were way behind. This country was way behind. All of the first important things accomplished in space were accomplished by the Soviets. They launched the first artificial satellite. They launched the first animal flights. They launched the first manned flight, the first orbital flight, the first two-man flight. They launched the first woman. They did the first extravehicular activity, EVA, it's called. It's all so-called spacewalk. They had the first lady to spacewalk. They did everything first. And they really made us work hard to catch up. We finally caught up, and they tried to make us think that they were not going to go to the moon. They acted like they had never tried, but they did try. They had, if you've seen the Saturn V, our booster, they had a great big booster like that too, but it didn't work. And it had 3 major explosions on the pad, and so they gave up trying to get to the moon, and we got there first, and that was a marvelous accomplishment for your country. And there will be another race when we're going to Mars, although it may be a cooperative flight. That's a big expense, tremendously costly trip. And maybe the nations will cooperate in flying to Mars. But it will happen. A little bit later this morning, you're going to get a chance to meet Rusty Schweiker. I want to tell you a little bit about him because he and a cosmonaut, Soviet cosmonaut, Alexei Leonov, started a group called the Association of Space Explorers, and this was in the middle of the Cold War, but the American astronauts and the Soviet cosmonauts started this organization called the Association of Space Explorers, and Rusty and Alexei did it, and it was a marvelous way for the cosmonauts and the astronauts as representatives of Russia and of the United States got together, and we were speaking on friendly terms before our countries were. It was a marvelous time. As part of that period, who knows, let me see, who knows the name of the first spaceman? Who? Yeah, well, Neil Armstrong, that's it. Of course, you're right, but there was another fellow in there too, and he was a Soviet cosmonaut, and his name was Yuri Gagarin. And he is the first man to ever fly in space. Members of the Association of Space Explorers went to Moscow to celebrate the 25th anniversary of Yuri Gagarin's flight. That was in '87. And there was a big party there. He's lionized by the Soviets. He's no longer living, but he is a great Soviet hero. And on the 25th anniversary of his flight, we all went to Moscow to celebrate. For the parents and the adults, Gorbachev was there, and all of the Russian dignitaries. Yuri was not there, but my counterpart from the cosmonaut corps is a fellow named, he's no longer living, German Titov, the second orbiter. I'm the second American orbiter. He was the second Soviet orbiter, and I've followed his exploits ever since Life magazine carried a story of his flight. And I've admired him greatly all these years. He's a short, very stocky, handsome fellow with a great sense of humor. That's what I liked about him. They took pictures of all the astronauts. Life magazine did this, getting off the centrifuge. Centrifuge is hard work, but you're competing with the other guys to make sure that everybody sees you can stand the stress of the centrifuge better than anybody else. And so we come off the centrifuge with the helmet tucked under our arm and strutting around. Can't hurt me. That's the way we all performed for the cameras in the United States. But I saw a Soviet film of German getting off the Soviet centrifuge, and he sort of staggered and looked at the camera and went cross-eyed. He was an honest man, and I always thought a lot of him because of his sense of humor and because of that film. In any event, he was asked to get up and speak in honor of his comrade, Yuri Gagarin. Of course, he didn't speak English. He said in Russian, and was later translated to the Americans in the group. He said, "I was not a participant in the early Soviet space program. I was a victim." And so that further endeared him to me. Anyway, these are stories from a long, long time back, and I'm through with that. Now it's time to do what you want.
Well, we'll get one or two questions from the audience. I know they're really excited to talk with you. So do we have one or two questions over here? All right, we got our first hand up. Why don't you tell us your name and your question?
Ben Turner, what was it like being in space?
I guess you heard the question. It's asked frequently, what's it like? It is beautiful. The sight of this planet, the home planet, from that point of view is unforgettable. It's simply gorgeous, but it is not of terra firma. We think of this planet as being solid and steady, but it's not. It is very delicate and fragile, and it deserves to be taken better care of. The other good thing about the answer to your question is what it's like. It's the pleasure of being weightless. That's a marvelous thing. It's addictive, as a matter of fact, and it's and you'll learn this word when you get to be a little older. Spaceflight is transcending. Go look it up. It's a marvelous experience.
But we have one more question that we're going to be able to take, and this little gentleman wants to ask you.
What's it like on the moon?
What's it like on the moon?
Well, now, do you know what I'm going to tell you? You're going to have to ask Neil Armstrong. Because I didn't go to the moon. I just went around the Earth. But I taught him how to get there.
Well, as we wrap it up, I was wondering if you have any final thoughts you want to share with our audience, and maybe for the kids out there that are going to be the first person on Mars.
Well, yes, I think I've already given that mantra. Stay in school, you kids. It's time for hard work, and it'll pay you back 1,000-fold if you work hard in school, and stay as long as you can. That's the best thing for you to do. All of us are encouraged to see your interest in the space program. It's man's finest adventure. And man, of course, I use man for mankind. And it's a man and or a woman's highest calling in my thinking. So hang in there and support NASA.
Scott Carpenter, thank you for your inspiration. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. If you remain seated, we're going to have the opportunity that he was on the second manned Apollo mission, and something that we just heard is that he was the co-founder of the Astronaut group, AFC, and it's really great to know. He's a very brave man. Please welcome astronaut Rusty Schweiker.
Thank you, Rick. Well, glad to be here with Sandy's fan club. Thanks a lot. By the way, I was the third manned mission. Yeah, Apollo 7, 8, and then 9. So.
Oh, well, 8, forget about it.
It's all just numbers. Well, thanks very much for coming out this morning. Just a few words, I guess, before we throw it open to Q&A, which is more interesting to both you and me. Apollo 9 was the third manned flight of the Apollo series, and Jim McDivitt, who was going to be here, unfortunately had to cancel out because his wife had a death in the family, so they had to cancel. And Dave Scott, who was the third member of the crew, lives in England now, so he wasn't able to come either, so I'm afraid he got stuck with me. I was the lunar module pilot on the Apollo 9 flight, and that was the first flight of the lunar module, and we flew it around the Earth on the first mission. Smart, stay around a local planet before you go out to the moon. And we spent 10 days in orbit around the Earth, testing the lunar module, and I went outside for a spacewalk, or EVA, which was the first test of the portable life support system that allowed us to run around on the surface of the moon on later missions. So I got to go outside the spacecraft and look at the Earth from that perspective. I think I'll just leave the rest of that. Of course, 2 missions later, we landed on the moon. For any of you who were here earlier and heard Scott Carpenter, I certainly appreciate one of my heroes of the program mentioning that I had also done some things like started the Association of Space Explorers back in the old days. And of course now about 90% or more of the astronauts and cosmonauts, in fact everybody who's been in space, are now members of that organization. It's sort of the professional group, the association of space flyers. And one of the reasons that we formed the organization was because I and a number of other people felt that the fact that very few people had been outside the Earth and looked back at the entire planet from, with their own eyes, that it was very important that these people be able to get together and talk with one another and share that experience and try to bring that to people around the world, and that was somehow a lot more important than the political differences which separated people. And thank heaven, the political climate changed to the point where now, of course, we're flying together on the International Space Station. But as Scott had mentioned, I'm very proud of the fact that we were actually ahead of the rest of the world when it came to saying this is one planet, we're all one people. That's a pretty important message that could get around a little wider today, as a matter of fact. Well, let's just open it up to Q&A and have some fun. Yes, sir.
All right, let's go back here. What's your name, sir, and your question?
Jim Brasco. The question I have is there a sensation when you leave the spacecraft of the speed that the spacecraft is traveling at?
Yeah, when you go outside, huh? I assume everybody could hear the question, so I won't repeat them. The answer is not really, not in the sense that you would think. I mean, if you stick your head out the window of your car when you're going 60 miles an hour, you know you're moving. You know it for two reasons. Number one, your hat gets blown off, and maybe your head as well, but also because the road is going by so fast. It's a blur. You can't even see anything on it. Whereas when you're in space, a couple hundred miles above the planet, and you get outside, number one, there's no wind at all. There's nothing there. It's a vacuum. So in fact, even if you let go of the spacecraft, you just stay right there. You can grab back on again if you want. There's nothing to separate you, so you don't have any sense of something blowing you. And secondly, when you look down, you can hardly see it moving because you're so far above the Earth. It's a lot more like being in an airliner flying across the country and looking down out the window at the ground. In fact, the relative motion is just about the same. Something's going by at about the same rate. The only difference is that intellectually you know you're going fast because instead of being, one side of the city and then the other side of the city, there's Chicago going by and then there's New York going by. So, the scale is different.
Your next question?
What is more stressful, the liftoff or the re-entry?
Well, I guess I would say that the liftoff is more anxiety-producing, just because you've got a pretty big firecracker underneath you there, and you never quite know what's going to happen. But on the other hand, it's not terribly stressful, and you're at that point in pretty good shape. On the re-entry, you're not quite so concerned about something blowing up. But on the other hand, you now have been in weightlessness for whatever, 2 weeks, 10 days in my case, or whatever, and you're not really in great shape. Gravity is, in your history, but you're now adapted to weightlessness. So when you start coming in, the force of gravity as you slow down in the atmosphere, the acceleration that's slowing down, is very, very obvious to you. You're very sensitized to it. Not to take too much time, but I was sitting on the right-hand side of the command module, and the commander, McDivitt's, all the way over on the left seat. And the G-meter was in front of McDivitt, And as we came in, the G-meter would go from 0, and finally, after 10 days, it would start coming up, And during the entry, it would peak at about, 6 Gs or something like that on a normal entry. And so you're coming into the atmosphere, and the heat shield is burning off, and all this stuff is flame and stuff going on. And you can very gradually feel the acceleration build up, and I waited for a while, and finally I looked over at Jim and I said, "Hey Jim, how many G's have we got now?" I'm sitting there bracing myself, and Jim looks up and he says, 0.5. Oh no.
All right, we have our next question right here.
Hey, there we go.
Logan, what's your question, Logan?
What did it feel like to fly the Spider?
What did it feel like to fly the Spider?
Okay, well, Spider was the name that we gave our lunar module. It's another story. Well, we'll save that one. what did it feel like? Well, it was really interesting to fly the lunar module because you know, it wasn't a smooth looking. Didn't look like the rocket ships we used to draw when I was your age, you know, in our school books and things. It was kind of ugly. Probably one around here somewhere. But anyway, it's kind of ugly and it's all got square surfaces and all that, you know. So it doesn't look like you know, a traditional rocket ship that Buck Rogers used to fly or something. But in terms of flying it, it was real fun because you stood up. There are no seats or couches in the lunar module. You stood up when you flew. And you could get a real good view out the window because you could put your head right up against it and look out. You know, it was really a lot of fun. And we had pretty big windows, so you got a terrific view of the Earth, in our case, or the moon later on.
And our last question.
Hi, Ask for Christmas. Some of the books I've read noted the concern that you guys had about being in a vessel that could not re-enter the Earth. Was that really true, or were you just confident that you had a good machine?
Yes and no. I mean, it was really true. It could not re-enter. As McDivitt said, successfully. No, it was not true that we were bothered by it or disturbed by it, but you were certainly aware of the fact, you know, when McDivitt and I went out for the first time in spaceflight, operating a vehicle where you obviously couldn't get back. You had to come back to the command module in order to get home safely. That was more of interest to the press than it was us. I mean, we didn't have any real lack of confidence that we'd be able to get back. First of all, we had two totally different ways of doing it because in the lunar module, McDivitt and I could get back to the command module. We went out 100 miles away from it and then came back in. And but if we couldn't do that, if something happened, then Dave Scott could take the command module and fly to pick us up. So we had two totally redundant ways of getting back safely. So it wasn't something that concerned us, but it was a point of interest, and the press will take any point of interest and amplify the devil out of it.
Well, do you have any last words, any final inspirational?
Well, I can make some up.
Well, you know what, go for it.
Well, I guess I'd say to the young kids, and I don't see all that many of them out here, but to the parents of young kids, that you know, we should always keep, in spite of everything that's going on the Earth, and there are obviously very real issues and problems and challenges here in terms of getting along with one another and keeping the Earth a healthy place to live. At the same time, we should always keep our eyes on the long-term future and the movement of humanity, life, intelligence outward from the planet. We started that in our generation. I mean, it's amazing that this transition from being a creature of the Earth to moving out into space began in our lifetimes. And it's something very precious to keep that opening to the future always in mind. And I think it's important for the kids to have their eyes on the stars and to press our governments, our representatives, politicians, etc., to always keep that door open to the future, because in the long run we're going to be going out from here and we're going to take the butterflies and the vegetables and everything else out there with us, and from this point on humanity will have a future not only on the Earth, which we should really take care of better, but also outward into who knows where for the future. So let's keep that in mind. Thanks.
I think you did a great job. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mr. Flager, for being here with us today.
Administration. Our job, according to the National Space Act of 1958, is to expand human knowledge of the phenomena of the atmosphere and space. And back in the old days, I think when we had been at Microsoft Station from here on, so what have we learned? Well, just this summer, we've learned why human beings have to explore the planet and learn to live and work on other places in this solar system. We've learned that we must do that. we found out that the last 4 major extinctions on this planet were caused by either asteroids or comets. We just learned that this summer. We expanded human knowledge. Now, you don't do something with that. What that says is the long-term event is going to be that single planet species don't make it. Now, the technology that we have to work on to put colonies on the moon and places on Mars and cities on Mars, which will happen in this century, are the same things that help us preserve life on this planet when the bad things happen, like terraforming. It'd be ironic to have to terraform this planet, but we could do it. I'll be glad to answer any questions you may have, because that's what it's all about, is answering questions about space exploration. I've been proud to have been associated with the people who are doing that. I think the human exploration of space is the most important program going on in this planet right now, particularly over here at the Kennedy Space Center, and probably going to be the most important in the next century that goes on this planet.
We have our first question for you.
Yes, John, I'd like you to know what it was like to fly with Gus Grissom, and do you still enjoy a good corned beef sandwich now and then?
Well, Gus is a great guy. He's a hard worker. He made us participate in all the test and check out of the vehicles, and so we spent many hours and days, nights and days, working on the vehicles, and that was the right thing to do, because back in the old days, they didn't have simulators that reproduced how the vehicle worked, so we spent a lot of time in test and check out. You know, he did the first maneuvers in space with the vehicle to demonstrate rendezvous. He did the first lifting re-entry, and we're going to land 190 miles short, and because Gus controlled the lift vector, we only landed 60 miles short. So he did a remarkable achievement on Gemini 3, and I think if the fire hadn't occurred, maybe Gus would have been the first man on the moon. He's a great guy.
Our next question.
Hi, Haskell Christmas. Looking back on it, do you think the German way of, by stages, going to the stars would have been better than the Apollo way? The first you build a station around the Earth, and then you go by steps out there as opposed to just straight up and back.
Well, I'd like to go straight up and back myself, but we've got this big space station that we're working on, and I think if you can learn long-duration operations in space flight and all the things we have to learn in space flight, like how to generate artificial gravity to give our people that are up there right now better calcium on their bones and eliminate your muscles atrophy and things like that. I think learn that on the space station would be invaluable. I think the use of the space station for learning how to handle long durations in zero gravity. And it will apply to us old folks too. You know, everything that happens in space flight to human beings happens real quick in space, and it happens to old folks in over a longer time frame. If we can whip it in space for these guys on short durations, it can sure do better for us old folks on the planet. And getting old, as some of y'all know, that's not fun.
Will has a question for you.
Beats the alternative.
Did you find anything interesting on the moon?
Did you find anything interesting on the moon you wanted to know?
Oh yeah, the moon is an interesting place. It's beautiful. It's really rugged highlands and rugged lowlands, and the backside is full of holes. If we had that many holes on the backside was facing us, we'd appreciate impact processes a lot more. The rocks that we found on our landing site were 3.92 billion years old. That's older than any rock you can find on this planet right here on Earth. And some of the crystals were 4.2 to 4.5 billion years old. If there's water on the moon, as they claim, I mean, it'll be a great place to build hydrogen-oxygen engines, because you can go to any place in the solar system for 1/20th of the energy that you have to use to blast out this gravity well on this planet. Now, living on the moon in 1/6 gravity, everybody will love it. It is delightful. I mean, you can jump up to the ceiling and touch the ceiling. Wouldn't that be fun? Yeah, you bet. And then when you drop your pencil, not like in zero gravity, you never find it again, you just look down. Yeah, see, 1/6 is wonderful.
Mark has our next question.
Hello, it's an honor to meet you. My grandfather and I have been fans of you for many years. We wanted to know when was your next flight scheduled?
When the next flight?
Yeah, when's your next flight scheduled?
I'd like to go again but it would be very dangerous because if I go again, my wife Susie says she'd kill me.
Our next question.
What accomplishment are you most proud of in your long career?
What
Accomplishment I'm most proud of in my whole career was marrying my wife Susie. It's the smartest move I ever made.
Our next question.
What's the sort of adrenaline feeling you get when you take off, and is it any different with the Apollo to the space shuttle?
Is it any different taking off from the Apollo in your Apollo missions from the space shuttle missions, and what's the adrenaline feel like?
Well, you know, they train you, like when you lift off on the shuttle, and within 5 minutes of launch, you have to throw 25 switches. There are several abort modes, so you better be thinking about what you're going to do if you have to abort. If this engine fails, if that engine fails, if both engines fails, you better be worried about your abort mode. So that's what you're thinking about. And that's what they pay you to think about. You know, they pay you if you have problems to solve them. Now, we never had any problems in our flights. I remember translunar insertion on Apollo 16. We had 2 failures, and they thought we were going to have to fly the inertial burn 5 minutes and 30 seconds straight up the manual. I didn't want to do that, but I was sure trained and ready to do it. And that's what they pay you for. So adrenaline is anticipating of what may be coming next, which is called apprehension. Probably a little bit of that, but some adrenaline is very helpful because your reflexes speed up, and that's good. Too much adrenaline where you're worried about living or dying, you should be in some other line of work. You know, so but Apollo shakes real bad, and it shakes so bad that you can't tell if your knees are shaking or not. So when you lift off in the space shuttle, it doesn't shake very bad at all, and you can sure tell your knees are shaking.
And we have our last question over here, John.
John, I was just wanting to know the actual color of the surface of the moon.
That's various places. Like we kicked up some stuff on our moon flight, and it turned from shady gray to pure white. In the Apollo 17 area where Jack Smith was, they were working in basalts, which was dark black, and they kicked up some dirt, and it was orange-colored soil under there. The Apollo 15 guys found some green glass on the, you know, it's just like any other place, except there's no water up there to turn everything, at least in our areas, there's no water up there to rust anything, so it's various shades of grays and blacks and browns. And it changes with sun angle. As the sun angle looks over it, there was a crater we saw on the backside of the moon where the rocks in it looked like anthracite coal and the walls looked like the white cliffs of Dover. Just awesome. And now you take a picture of it with those 25-year-old cameras, it comes back. It's just like taking a picture of a sunset. You can't see nothing.
Now, as we wrap it up, I was wondering if you have any final thoughts to share with our audience, and especially for the kids out there that might want to follow in your big footsteps.
No, I don't have big footsteps, little bitty footsteps. I think it'll be a lot of fun because I do think in this century the planet is going to have spread the species out a little bit. I think that'll be the saving of the species in the long run, because one of these days the inevitable bad things are going to happen on planet Earth. And when we have the technology that allows us to evacuate to the moon or evacuate to Mars or maybe some of the asteroids, we can save a lot of people. When you have the technology to be able to terraform on Earth and to operate under big shades like you would if you had a super volcano, if you operated under a couple of thousand square miles of inflatables, you could, and you had below freezing temperatures. The temperate zones, which you'll have with a super volcano, you can feed everybody. And I think that's going to happen. We're going to have the technologies we need for the long-term benefits of saving the species and living and working on places like the moon and Mars with 1/6 gravity on the moon, about 1/3 gravity on Mars. That would be a lot of fun.
Astronaut John Young, thank you so much for your inspiration. Ladies and gentlemen, John Young. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated as we escort our astronaut onto his next appointment. Thank you so much for joining.
There's no
no atmosphere, there's no air, there's no color. It's mostly a brown. If you really like the desert, you'd like the moon. Or vice versa.
Now, unfortunately, we do have to wrap it up. We have one last question, and Brianna's going to ask that.
Out of all your missions, what was your favorite?
Out of all my missions, gosh, you really catch me short. That was my only mission.
Would you have liked to go on back? Would you like to go down?
Sure. I'd go back anytime. But Apollo 15 was the only mission. Canceled the program on me, what can I say?
Well, do you have any last thoughts that you'd like to share with our audience? Perhaps something to say to the young kids out there that want to follow in your footsteps and become an astronaut?
I think, all you old folks like me, you don't have to hear this, but all you young folks out there, I would say one thing to you. Space is the future. That's where we're going as a civilization. Barring a few that we might arrest before then. But space is where we're going. And it's really good to be prepared for that. And the only way you can be prepared for that is to get yourself mentally and physically prepared. Mentally, go to college. That's the most important thing I can tell anybody who has not been to college. Go to college and get a good degree. Don't just go to college because you have to. Go because you want to, because you want to be involved in this exciting new thing called space, because you want to get an education. The most important thing anybody can ever tell you. Go to college. Thanks.
Well, thank you for your inspiration. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. We ask you to please stay seated as our astronaut guest is escorted on to his next appearance. Thank you for joining us, and please don't forget, we have one more appearance today at 1 o'clock, so please join us for that. Thank you. Thank you, Bill. I was wondering if you could tell us or share a few words with our audience before we go out there and get their questions.
Well, she went through the biography pretty thoroughly there. But as was said, this was the first flight on the giant Saturn V rocket and the first flight away from the Earth. And we were fortunate enough during the flight for me to be able to take the Earthrise picture. And it was amazing to me that we had studied a lot about the lunar surface, how whether it was made of craters or volcanoes, and yet after 3 orbits around the moon, it became a little bit boring. And then we, for the first time, when we changed the attitude of the spacecraft, saw the Earth rising up. The only color that we could see, it was a much more interesting place. And it always seemed ironic to me that here we come 240,000 miles to study the moon, and yet it was the Earth that impressed us the most. People have often asked in that regard, what was the most impressive thing? And indeed, it wasn't the Saturn V or even the moon, it was the Earth. It was beautiful, colorful, fragile, and it was about the size of your fist at arm's length. And it doesn't take much of a mathematician to imagine that if you were 10 lunar distances away, instead of just 1, the moon would be 1/10 the size of your fist. And 10 lunar distance is nowhere in space. 100 lunar distances is nowhere in space, really. And so now you're talking about, an almost insignificant physical object, the planet that we walk around on. And yet, this is our home, this is where we evolved, so it's very important to humankind, but I can tell you that on the cosmic scale of things, this is a puny place that we better learn to treat carefully. Well, if I can have some questions in the few minutes we have, there you go.
Okay, we have a couple. Why don't you tell us your name? Stand up for me. Sorry, we got one right over here. We'll take some of them. What's your name and your question?
Zachary, what was your favorite mission?
What was my favorite mission?
I know that's a hard one.
I kind of liked Apollo 8. I was surprised recently to read that our mission commander, Frank Borman, and I was offered the lunar landing flight and turned it down. So I'm a little disappointed about that, but we had a good flight and I was glad to be part of it.
Our next question.
I'm Olaf Becker from Germany, and I ask you why you didn't fly later, a later mission, Apollo mission.
I was back up for Apollo 11, the lunar landing mission, and then was to fly on Apollo 13, again as the command module pilot, but at that time the Nixon administration was trying to come up with a program to follow on after Apollo, and I've been somewhat outspoken that the early lunar landings really had accomplished the mission of Apollo, which was to demonstrate to the Soviet Union and the rest of the world that the United States was a viable technical power. We've been embarrassed by Sputnik and Gagarin, and that's why that was the reason for Apollo. It wasn't for exploration, it was not for technology, it was a political, another battle in the Cold War. And so I was asked to come to Washington to help formulate the post-Apollo program, and I left at that time.
Our next question.
When you're looking through the window at the moon, particularly the backside of the moon, it would seem that you could never really know how high you were if all you saw was the moon without the edge of the moon, because there's it seems to be an infinite number of craters of various sizes, so you have no scale. Is that a good assessment?
That was a problem during the lunar landing flight. You looked at the moon, you didn't know whether you were 100 feet or 100 miles or what, because it was just hole upon hole upon hole. As you pointed out, if you could see the lunar horizon, then you kind of knew you were up there. But if we looked at the moon through magnifying devices, it was impossible to get a judgment of altitude. And particularly on the lunar landings, which I trained for in the lunar module, in the lunar training vehicle and other simulators, on the moon there's no barns or trees or fences that pilots use. We don't pay much attention to altimeters when we're on final approach. We're looking out, there's a pine tree, we know how big pine trees are, there's a barn or a car. And generally in a runway, which is generally about 200 feet wide, so you have all kinds of scaling tools to land on Earth. On the moon there's just holes. And so that's why you had to have a radar in the lunar module. Without it, I think it would have been very hard to land. And to make matters worse, in order to be in a cool spot, but still with sunlight on the moon, they had to land just as the sun was coming up on the moon, which meant that the sun was right behind the landing pilot's head. And so that when you're driving at night and you see a reflectorized highway sign, it always flashes back at you, looking most the way the same angle that the headlights hit. It's not like a mirror. If you shine a flashlight on a mirror, where does the light go? It goes over sideways. It's like a cue ball in a billiard game. In the moon, it's backscatter reflection. And what this does, like whiteout in snow, the same phenomenon. You can't see the moguls if you're skiing down the sun. It made the moon look smooth. So besides not knowing how high they were, it always looked like the guys were landing in a smooth area, and it was when they pitched over and looked down, and oh my God, look at that big hole right underneath the lunar module. So it was an instrument landing, pretty much.
Our next question.
Did Bauman and Lovell experience any physiological weakness, incapacitations, anything? I won't ask you if you did that, but not ever much said about that. I understand it still happens, but...
Well, everybody, I would say, in space, initially, gets a little queasy, kind of get that furry feeling right there in your throat. But when I was the first out of the seat, and picking up the helmets and getting things put away, and I did a couple of little flips. And I said, I don't think I'll do this anymore, at least for a while. And things were okay, but then one of our party, I won't mention his name, but you already have, got sick. And he got sick in both directions. And let me tell you, and I had to put on an oxygen mask. I mean, it was grim. And the next time next time you get sick, without getting into detail, or even attending to normal bodily activities, just imagine how it would be when you go in the bathroom and there's no gravity. It just goes everywhere.
Okay, well, unfortunately, we don't have much time, so we're going to take our last question from Hannah.
When did it really hit you that you were actually going to see the moon?
Well, we were so busy training, Hannah, that we almost became robots. We were in simulators for years, and it frankly, the first, and on the way to the moon, we were forbidden by edict and by the geometry of the position of the spacecraft from seeing the moon, because we went when the moon was very new. That means the sun was almost behind the moon, and they were afraid if we looked up at the moon, it would blind us, or it would hurt our eyes, just like an eclipse. So it wasn't until we were turned around and going backwards, ready for our decelerating burn behind the moon, when I looked out of my window, we'd gone now behind, we couldn't get any, we were in what I call the double umbra. We were in the shadow from Earthshine. It was almost a full Earth. And so we were behind the moon, couldn't see the Earth. The sun, we hadn't come out into sunlight yet, and it was black as pitch. And there were just millions of stars, so many stars that you couldn't determine the constellations. And I looked out of the window, and suddenly the stars stopped. And there was this big black hole. And for the first time, the hair went up on the back of my neck. And I think that's when the animal in me realized that we were on more than just a simulated first flight to the moon. Well, thank you very much. I hope you enjoy your stay here. This is a wonderful facility, and the Saturn V facility has the Apollo 8 mission tapes that I think you'll find very interesting. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for your inspiration. Ladies and gentlemen, we ask that you do stay seated so that our astronaut can get on to his next appearance. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great day at Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex.